Hey, David, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Matei. I appreciate it.
So, tell me your story. Who is David?
David is a productivity obsessed individual. When I was young, I was fascinated child to an immigrant who really kind of instilled the love and joy of being productive and having a strong work ethic and having the ability to kind of identify your passions and make them your work so you never feel like you're working your whole life. So I was very fortunate to watch that as a role model and also just kind of count down the days until I got to do it. I had a moment when I was about 6. My parents replaced the phone system in their office and they had a garage. They had a box full of old phones and wires. And I took them and I set them up in my room and I didn't have a place to plug in the phone, but I like would watch it and like wait for it to ring. And I was like, one day I'm going to have a phone in an office that's going to ring. And so that was kind of like my earliest moment where I felt like I kind of knew what I wanted. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I didn't know what people were going to call me for, but I wanted to be of service. And then I think I just kind of spent my years being curious and developing more skills, kind of at the intersection of creativity and business. And I think that's kind of where I've toggled most of my life.
Tell me more about your parents and their immigrant story.
So my dad was an immigrant from Israel, came to the US after the army, after a war, ended up, he grew up on a kibbutz. And so it was all about being very productive with your hands, being very self-sufficient. And so he came to the US and he had a passion for nature. So he started a gardening business. It turned into a landscaping business. It turned into building, paradises in people's backyards with like a high-end pool remodeling business. So I got to watch him go from loving nature to loving to help nature become a bigger part of people's lives to helping build natural paradises. And I watched that journey for like 20 years. And what I took from it was the joy he had from servicing customers in a creative way they couldn't serve themselves, and also just that despite how busy he was, he never felt out of love with how he's spending his time. And so that's kind of what I grew up in. My mom was also kind of the accountant of the business. So they were very connected with the right brain, left brain thing, which was another useful tool to me because I found that I always wanted partners in my professional life. I never was obsessed with doing things alone. I always wanted to find the complement of what came easier to me than them and what came easier to them than me, and kind of having that kind of interdependency to kind of hold one another up in areas that were not strong or in areas where one side gets fatigued. So those were kind of the two major, I think, lessons that I grew up with that gave me a really good foundation for what I wanted to build.
And what did you learn about business? Were there any ups and downs in the business? Was it just up and to the right? What was the story there?
Yeah. So at first, I remember some of my first like sick days that I got to follow my dad around, and I watched the nuance of how you build relationships. I remember a specific moment where he was taking a subcontractor who he felt overcharged or underdelivered on a particular pond. And I saw him kind of tear the guy apart a little bit. And I first was like, oh, wow, that wasn't kind. But then the guy agreed to redo it. And I think my dad kind of like got that. And then my dad said at the end, when he realized that the guy really took ownership over his workmanship, he's like, you know what? I have this one other job nearby. You want to come with me? I think I might have another opportunity for you. And he drove nearby, and the guy was so shaken up from the last job that he like came up with a price that was super cheap because he just wanted to kind of apologize and stay in my father's good graces. And then my dad's like, oh, you know what? I can throw an extra grand your way. We have a little more money here. And so I saw my dad in 1 hour go from beating somebody up to get the quality and the price right to then overpaying someone deliverably. And it was so confusing at like 6 or 7 years old. And I like had him explain to me what happened. And I just realized like the power of relationships and the power of being equitable, the power of having standards and building a crew of people around you that wanted to meet those standards. And there was just something fascinating to me about that. And so, the good times were kind of watching that unfold. I think the darkest time was 2008. He was spending $500,000 in their backyard in 2008. And there was a stretch where I watched my dad go from not working to win business to not having business to deliver. And I watched a little bit of the entrepreneurial turmoil of not feeling productive, not feeling an abundance of ways to do things, not even having clients to talk to. And I watched him struggle, and it was a really kind of scary to me because I'd never seen him vulnerable in that way, like not being able to use the muscle that made him feel alive. And at that moment, I was a little awakened to the reality of I need to build a business that's more important than I am. Like, I need to build a business that has sustained value, that isn't like just a luxury, that isn't just a service, it's a product. It was the moment where I went from running a creative agency, which was like my first chapter, where I had to be smart and be craveable and be in demand to win more business, to I need to build something that's more recession proof and is relevant in good times and bad times. And so it forced me to get ahead of never being in the moment that I watched him in. Uh, and so both served me well, the good times and the bad times. But I was, again, thankful super early in my career I had witnessed both. So I didn't have to hit that wall, um, myself. I just had to work hard, and I had to know the strategy I needed to deploy to not fall into those same circumstances.
How was it for your dad during that 2008 timeframe? I mean, it sounds like he's a man who's been through some hard shit with, the war and immigrating and all that. Like, I'm curious how he handled the business slowdown.
I mean, emotionally, not well at all. I witnessed how much of an entrepreneur's identity is tied into their output, which was I don't know, it was a learning experience, but it was scary. Like, it was scary. It was dark. It wasn't beautiful. It was like, you're like, oh, you kind of realize that to have that much capacity and passion and work ethic, like, you really are building an entire system that feeds off of recognition and appreciation from clients, not just their money. And when that all goes away, you're malnourished, and I saw him malnourished, and I was frightened for him, albeit there wasn't really much I could do. But I was more frightened for me because I'm like, there was so much of my life design that was based on recreating this very joyful, productive world. And I was like, oh no, what we call in software an edge case. I have to figure out how to have the beauty and the power and the fulfillment, but my system needs to somehow be immune to this type of circumstance because I never want to feel what he's feeling. He had moments of like early retirement visions. He had moments of, adopting hobbies. He got really deep into model airplanes, but it was a very thin layer of joy. It wasn't authentic. It was a way to occupy his time and put his capacity into something. He wasn't, sitting at home, but it was sad because he wasn't himself. And that lasted for several years. So, our relationship even changed through that because he just showed a different side of himself and had to acknowledge that was a side that may exist forever. And so it was humbling and eye-opening. And I think we all kind of evolved through it, even though it was, his particular journey.
How did your relationship change with him? How did your roles change?
I saw a humility in him that I had never really seen. Immigrants, but I think most people that struggle early, had to grow up fast, tend to project confidence and tend to believe that confidence projection is one of the biggest gifts they can pass on to their children. I think that's like a pretty common like immigrant story. I think he felt like he didn't know how to be a role model and that was really hard because he is an incredible father, but so much of what he knew he was feeding me in particular. I was the entrepreneurial child of the three of us. He didn't know what to give me. It's like, he wasn't going to teach me to have hobbies. That didn't feel real. He wasn't going to teach me to retire early or to give up, but he didn't know what to teach me. And I didn't have some obvious thing to feed off. I wasn't feeding off the inspiration. I wasn't feeding off the work ethic. He wasn't teaching me about the latest challenges in business that week. So we kind of had a void where the only relationship we could have at that time was like a human one. It wasn't this business entrepreneurial thing we had in common. And so, it evolved into like learning who he is, learning what he's afraid of, learning what parts of his life he had never focused on. So I say it added depth, but it went through an era of discomfort for probably both of us for a while. And then on the other side, we got to share both. We had this like human relationship, this vulnerable, man relationship, and then this really beautiful entrepreneurial, we want to build things, we want to make the world better and more beautiful than it was before we started. So we kind of ended up adding more dimensions, but it was born out of sadness and fear, and but it ultimately added a lot more to our connection.
How did your mom, what did she do during this thing? She was also involved in the business. How did she take it?
She took it very hard because the first impact was financial, and that was kind of her side. My dad celebrated winning. He didn't celebrate finance. My mom celebrated finance and celebrated cash flow. So she, I would say, shut down maybe a little bit more. She became hyper practical, and it was like, let's let people go, pull back spending, let's downsize office, let's move office to a different city where it's cheaper. Like, she wasn't thinking about how to weather the storm as much as she was thinking about how to preserve value and equity and cash. And those were very opposing because my dad, you tend to only get that inspiration by being really expansive and being really optimistic and having vision. And it's very contrary to taking steps backwards and preserving and saving and shrinking. And so, unfortunately, it actually put in motion what became a divorce. It wasn't from that event, but I think that event perpetuated that their states of mind were different. But it ended up putting both of them in a better place where they could be more of themselves and less trying to emulate what the other one wanted. So I learned a whole different thing about partnership in that process. But, my mom equally was very direct about her concerns. She would never sugarcoat anything. She wasn't someone of inaction, but she was kind of killing the dream while my dad was holding on to the dream, and it wasn't pleasant to watch that unfold for several years, in a house. But it was real. It's real life, and so it was part of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of this is a lot of entrepreneurship and business is tied to the personal side of it, and you can't just leave your work in the office, and you have to bring it back. I'm curious, what happened afterwards? Did the business ever start up again, or
Yeah,
what's?
yeah, yeah. Interesting enough, it just like went through a little bit of a renaissance of how do we build it in a way that's more efficient? How do we become a little bit more of a puffer fish where we can expand contractors very quickly as things are good, but reduce kind of the fixed operating costs? So there was a wave of starting to learn a lot from him again as he started to build what we would deem as a more scalable version of the sale operation, because he kind of got to start from the bare bones, and he got really excited about building. And it wasn't just about having business again, it was about building a business that was less vulnerable, right, to the risks that we all now experience can happen. And so yeah, so they rebuilt and they had a thriving, I mean, I'm trying to think how many years, a thriving 10, 12 years that were just growth, 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 growth years. They were more selective about the type of business. They were more focused on margin than they were top line. They were now like, this is our sprint towards retirement. And we're not going to do this to try to, sell a thing someday to someone. We're going to do this to generate as much value for the family as possible. And we're gonna do it as smart, and the market will tell us when we're done. And they weren't gonna go weather another 2008. They were gonna push until they couldn't push anymore. And that's kind of exactly what happened all the way up till 2021.
Wow. And did your mom become involved in the business again after the
Yeah, yeah.
divorce?
They were both, I mean, even during the rough time, I mean, they had a pretty good separation of church and state. I think in today's world, if you think about millennials and stuff, like, they could never do that. But there's something about like the baby boomer generation and back where like their tolerance for pain and putting what matters first, which is family and money and financial security, like much higher tolerance of pain and discomfort to put that first than I think the current generation, which I really respected. I think I got a lot of my morals and my priorities out of them, which I really appreciate. I feel like if I fed off of peers, I'd have a lot less tolerance for what matters versus my personal comfort. And so they demonstrated, even though they weren't meant to be, that they could still be highly productive because they had a religion they both believed in as to what mattered. And that was always coming first. And we got to witness that. And that was like another really respectable moment that I wanted to kind of carry with me into not only my partner world, but even my personal life with my wife, and thinking about moments where we will agree to put certain things first above our own perspectives or comfort or alignment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Tell us what you were doing while all this was going on. It sounded like you had a creative agency. I mean, maybe even go back further than that. So it sounds like you're a pretty entrepreneurial kid. What was the first business or the first job that you had, and take us from there.
So my first job was a combination of wanting to get girls and self-preservation. So we moved to Israel when I was 11. We were supposed to live there forever. It didn't end up working out. But while we were there, I was so out of my comfort zone as an 11-year-old, didn't speak the language, didn't have friends. Parents were not in their best stable state. So I needed something and I leaned on DJing. And so I bought a DJ set and I ended up selling the school on letting me do DJing for all the school assemblies, and all the kids hired me for house parties. And then as they started having bar mitzvahs, they hired me for their bar mitzvahs. And I started just being the guy. So it helped a little bit with the girl stuff, but more importantly, it gave me something to lean into where I had some of the creativity with music and I had a little bit of a social life through it. But more importantly, I was like, wow, like I had a meeting with the principal at 11 years old, like allowing me to be in charge of sound for 500 students. I was like, that's not nothing. Like my dad wasn't there brokering that. My mom wasn't. Like I didn't even speak the principal's language, but I somehow had conviction and confidence to tell him their sound system wasn't sufficient and the students would pay more attention if I played music in between speakers. You know what I mean? Like I found a way to be relevant and to get what I wanted and provide value at the same time. And I felt like suddenly the things I had witnessed younger, like I kind of felt like I had that muscle. So that was a confidence booster. It gave me purpose. It gave me something to do. I built a business. I started making most of the money I ever needed through DJing. Did that up until I was about 17. And then I found video, I found special effects, I found web development, and I started kind of seeing that the most practical thing I wanted to really do was help people with their brand and their story and connect with their customers. Like I felt like anything that involved building or strengthening relationships kind of became my thing. And so I like this idea of being the brand guy, the communications guy, the website design guy, the video guy. Like there was this whole kind of bucket of things that really involved storytelling that were going to be the difference between a connection that a company could have with their customers or their members or their donors. So I really leaned into that. And then I similarly went to my high school and I convinced the principal, that became my thing, to let me create videos for every major like event through the year, which ended up being like every other week we had like an assembly. So it was the history department. It was the Jewish department. It was like all these departments had things they wanted to do, but they weren't connecting with the kids in a way that was exciting, inspiring. They weren't putting upbeat music to it. And so I said, I want to do this. I helped them get a little bit of money from donors to build like a video department. I pulled one of my best friends into it, and we ended up starting like cranking out videos, almost like a full-time job. And we made video synonymous with like every major assembling event at the school, and then created a whole generation after us that did that. Like it was like there was always like a video thing. But I created like another like stage for myself to have a need that needed to be fulfilled, and I had to do it, and I had to challenge myself, and I had to improve my skill, and I had people depending on me. I had to build a team, and like suddenly I put myself in another situation where it wasn't a business, but it had all the mechanics of a business. And I found that I kept putting myself in situations that started feeling more like that thing I really wanted when I was young. And that
What were you getting? Were you getting paid by the school to do this? Were you making any money?
No, but I had a theory, and my theory came true, which was there were a couple teachers that had side hustles. One was a tutor who had a tutoring center that was doing a ton of SAT prep, and another had this thing where she was teaching babies sign language. And suddenly all these teachers with side hustles came to me and were like, hey, maybe you can create a promo video, or hey, I've got all these like teachings. Maybe you can come and record me and we could build like a DVD that I could sell for $200 a pop. And suddenly what we found was like, by the time I was in 11th grade, I had contracts with my teachers to produce
Wow.
stuff. And myself and my partner ended up like not having to work at summer camp that summer, not having to DJ. And we like were doing multimedia production as a job during our summer. That launched into an agency where we then ended up getting frozen yogurt chains and local businesses and people that needed websites. And that just spawned this crazy decade of multimedia, brand strategy, digital development. Like we ended up refining the skills to make them more relevant with what is the highest value, the most complex, that would allow us to kind of create a lane for ourselves in internet meets storytelling meets social media. And we rode that journey for about a decade up until I really figured out what a SaaS software business was. And then that became the next chapter that started in about 2011.
Tell me more about the economics of the business, because it sounds like, yeah, it was a lot more service based. I'm assuming the margins were lower. Walk me through what that breakdown was, and also what the growth was. Was it easy to grow? What kind of growth rates were you seeing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at our first year ever, we did 110 grand where we were like a full calendar year, when I was, I mean, maybe like 18. And then, over the course of the decade, we got up to about 3 million in annual revenue. We were always making money. We never raised money. We never took on debt. We never had even a business credit card. So we were always making money. It was very black and white. Like that was where my mom's accounting mind was very helpful. We leaned into things that had higher value over time. You start to realize there's so much people are going to spend for a video, but oddly enough, video is so subjective, takes so much more time. There you got this thing called websites that you can kind of get people to always spend money iterating on and optimizing. And so we got smarter about what things were worth selling the most and getting better at. I'd say we generally operated the business at between a 20 to 30% profit margin. And myself and my partner kind of split that at the end of the year. But then we started identifying that these tools, these companies started asking us to help them implement for social media. There's a company called Sellfire, there's a company called Buddy Media, and these guys were selling for 150 million, 300 million, 800 million. And as we started watching that happen between like 2009, 10, 11, I was like, we're pretty smart, we're pretty early. We've been successful winning business when we apply ourselves. We got to go build a business that has more future equity value. And so we kind of pivoted and said, all right, we got all these CPG clients that are paying us a little against the odds. We had very little portfolio. We were very young. We had a small team, but we had brands that were doing $3 billion in market, giving us all their digital business at the age of 23, So we kind of knew we had an edge. We weren't totally sure how to exploit it, but we knew we had an edge. So we started kind of obsessively thinking about like, where can we create value where there's a license? It's not a service. We could go sell the same thing to many people. We could, copy and paste code was my original term for productize. And so that's what we started doing. And we experimented with a few things. And then we finally latched on to our first one, which was all the brands needed a better way to connect their customers to products. And they didn't have a way to do it. It was like there was an application missing and there was data missing. And we knew how to build the application. And we said every brand on their website could have a great way to let customers find their products. But where's this data going to come from? And that's when a couple of the clients said, oh, there's 3 data companies in Chicago. They're within 2 miles of each other. We get this data from this one, this data from this one, this data from this one. If you go get data from all of them, you've got our business, and I'll introduce you to 5 other brands that want the same thing. And when we heard that, I kind of felt like the yellow brick road lit up. I'm like, I think I just figured out the thing I'm supposed to go do next. So I got on a flight to Chicago, had some great meetings. 2 of the data companies said yes. The third data company said yes, but also said, why don't we acquire you? And then I came back home and I said, I think we're on the verge of a new chapter where we're going to have access to data. We're going to build a lot of these applications and we're going to climb ourselves out of the service business and now start providing this type of value at an enterprise scale level where we're going to wrap value around data rather than wrap value around human capital. Does that make sense? And transition was pretty massive. And it was the first moment that I felt like I was starting to solve not going through what my dad went through in 2008.
And were you still in Israel at this point, or where were you living?
No, we only lived there for 2 years. Yeah, no, we moved
Okay.
back when I was 13. My age at this point, this was 2012, 2013. I was about, what was I? I was 26, 27 at that point.
Got it. And this insight where you had the brand tell you that if you can get data from those three different companies and put it together, you'll have something. Was that just one client that said it, or did you hear it from multiple? Like, at what point did you feel confident that, yeah, this is the pivot that I want to do?
I'm sure you've heard the cliche, but like at a certain point in time in your career, when you've had a thing and you act on the thing and you have confidence in your ability to try to make something happen, like you kind of sometimes just know this is a linear path. And I just kind of like, I just felt like all the things like aligned. I'm like, well, I have a thing. I reached out to this brand about a specific topic and it was a total cold outreach. It was actually, the brand was Stonyfield yogurt. They were kind of a category leader at the time in the organic yogurt side, and they responded to me right away. Met this amazing woman who totally was their head of marketing and had this huge amount of love for what we were doing and loved that we were early and scrappy. And she just kind of gave me the playbook, and she basically was like, "There's three things somebody like me cares about." And I'm in this group with Applegate and Annie's and all these other big companies that are also category leaders. And she's like, they care about all these same things. I'll help you do this for us. And if you can pull it off, I will help you. And if you have the five of us, I think you have the industry. And it sounded a little good to be true, but I kind of also believed her. And then when I met with the data companies and I got them to say yes, and then I came back and was able to do it for her 4 weeks later, and she saw it and she's like, I can't believe you're able to pull this off. Then she CC'd me on an email to the head of marketing at Applegate, head of marketing at Annie's. And all of a sudden I'm like, they all said yes within like a month. And I was like, I think we just figured out our first SaaS business. And quietly, like, we're like, we have a monopoly because like no one else has ever convinced the data companies to give data for this. So we at least have enough time for somebody to see this matters. But if we are not going to be, this was like another business thing. My dad was never big on self promotion. He was never self-congratulatory. It was always very humble, very quiet, I never liked talking about myself. I've never been so like on social media. I think I've written 3 social media posts my whole life. One was when I proposed to my wife. One was when I had my first kid. It's a muscle I actually need more of, but it's never a muscle that that was natural or something I spent time doing. So we operated in stealth mode for like 3 years. The only people that heard about us were brands that already acknowledged they needed us. And so by the time we won, we're like 400 brands deep. The catch up was so dramatic that we didn't really have competition for 6, 7, 8 years. And by then we were, 77%, 78% of the market. And we had proven that this kind of SaaS business sitting on a data company was like a pretty incredible thing. And now is a time to do that across many different vectors, not just locating products for marketing, but there's many types of applications where people wanted workflows powered by data more than they just wanted raw data. I became deeply fascinated in that. I know, Gabe. And so Tony became my partner. I give him a lot of credit for telling me what I could do of value before I even knew, to kind of take the raw data as my new canvas and bring my kind of obsession of building value in digital products and design, and said, I'll run the core side of the business. Can you go figure out how to turn this into like a digital marketplace and do what you did with the locator 10 other times? And he's like, I think this could be a $1 billion business one day. And I'm like, well, that's a lot more than whatever I'm doing feels like it'll be worth. So let's join forces. And so I literally moved to Chicago 3 months after that. And, that became the beginning of me saying, I'm no longer a creative agency. I'm a SaaS founder. I'm building software. I'm managing data. And, from then it kind of changed the trajectory for me, the scale I could create value at. And again, building things that have kind of a little bit recession proof value, and was a much more exciting canvas because the possibilities are endless. And so since 2013 to now, that's kind of been the new era, and that's kind of been the new area of innovation for me.
Wow. So I want to go back to that initial pivot. So after you have that conversation with Stonyfield and they tell you basically what they'd want build, is that was the point you were doing around like 3 million in revenue? And like, did you, when you're using your own money to build the product, you didn't have to raise, like you had enough money to build this? Super interesting.
Going back to, it's funny, I've never told the story in this exact way, but I get a phone call from my principal of my high school, literally within the month that Stonyfield conversation had. And he's like, hey, we've got this event at our school and I'd love you to be a speaker, as an entrepreneur. So I go and do it. And then he pulls me aside at the end. He's like, hey, because you're doing development stuff, we had this engineer that's been doing this custom stuff for us for a while. He's totally brilliant. He's a little crazy, but he's mostly brilliant. He's looking for a job. If you need anything, just keep him in mind. I want to see him land somewhere. I'm like, make an intro. I will, and I have a call with the guy. And within 15 minutes, I turn to my partner in my office and I'm like, I think I just found the guy that's going to build V1 of our locator. And sure enough, we're like, listen, we can put $20,000 aside to get you to this milestone. If you can execute on it, we'll give you another 20 grand to get to this milestone. If that works, I'll put you on the payroll for 70 grand. That's all we can do. And he's like, that's what I was making at your high school. That's good enough for me to start. So Destini was born out of my principal calling me and basically telling me he had a guy. So it was like the third major moment where some connection to my high school or whatever ended up having like a really profound impact on me, my team, the business. And it just like, it all felt like the timing was too serendipitous that it was almost like before I even met the guy, I was like, man, I feel like you're supposed to play a role in my life, and sure enough, and that guy ended up being the core architect of the business for 12 years. And
Wow.
it's
And
an incredible journey. Yeah.
I'm sure he was making more than, 20 or 70 grand by the end of this. So it's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah. No,
pivot for him too.
he did pretty well. He did pretty well over the journey, but more importantly, it was like, again, back to the relationship thing, the like looking around the room and being like, you've been with us for 12 years. You wrote our first line of code. You sold our first locator. My wife was my director of sales for 4 years because she hated her old job. She needed a place. She was going to help us for a little bit until she figured out the next thing. And 4 years later, she had sold 14 million in ARR of locators, like never having
Wow.
sold anything in her life. So the beauty of building the team and the relationships and having the personal interwoven with the professional. Like I know a lot of people look really poorly on that, like as the best practice. But when your life is building this thing and you're so committed to hitting that financial security moment, and you're just like, if I'm going to be living in it, I might as well live in it with all of these. And if my wife wasn't going to feel comfortable in that environment, is this relationship ever going to work? You're like, this is going to be such a huge part of my life, my identity, my stress, my joy. The fact that she was able to live in it with me, like dramatically accelerated our connection. It didn't take away from it. So, it was just this like beautiful mess of like interwoven dependency that when we started feeling like the power of all of us created something of value that never existed before and a lot of people were willing to pay for, it actually like just created this vibration among all of us. And it just became fun and inspiring and gave us all more energy and really gave me a lot more ambition as an entrepreneur, where I felt like I spent less time trying to validate that I had the goods and more time pushing myself to reach like a new level. And thankfully, Tony was one of those people who really just like instilled more confidence in me than I knew how to in myself and gave me permission to like level up again and again and again. And that's where innovation comes from. Like just becoming less fearful of what you don't know you're capable of or what you haven't done yet being some indication of what you may or may not be able to do. That's like a real limiter. And it's beautiful when you stumble upon people intentionally or unintentionally that literally remove that limiter from you. And I've been fortunate that a few times in my life that happened. And I'm like grateful because the greater joy was unlocked on the other side of that.
Yeah. No, yeah, but yeah, finding these kinds of people, finding mentors, finding partners is yeah, what makes this whole thing. And so going back to your wife who didn't have sales experience, and this is right after you guys pivoted to the locator product. And you said like, so the business was doing 3 million at that point, and she brought in another like 14 on top of that within a couple of years. How'd that go?
Yeah. So it was over the course of 4 years that we ended up getting to 14 million. So I sold maybe the first 70, 80 locators. She came in and sold the next 300. And so yeah, I mean, we were growing by, 50, 60% year over year in those early years. It was like clockwork. And yeah, she learned that, she always prided herself on our dates where she was like, I was number one on the debate team and I should have been a lawyer. And I kind of was like, well, hey, maybe you can take all that energy and conviction and apply it to sales. And I think the thing that won her over is, we were all totally shaken in our boots. We heard there's this Super Bowl of the natural products industry called Expo West. And 2013, we're like, we got to go meet this spins company in person, this data company. We're going to go see Stonyfield. We're going to go shake some hands. But I think we're going to go booth to booth and tell brands we have something that we know a couple big brands already use, right? And we're like, we just got to go, spread the gospel. And so her, myself, and my best friend, my business partner since second grade, we the three of us descended upon Expo West with zero. But we had some brochures, we had a map of the place, and we just were like, you take these rows, I take these rows. Let's like hope we come out with business cards. And over 3 days, we just took it down. And I found that my wife loved the performance. She loved the fashion. She had these like ridiculously loud outfits and skirts that were obnoxious, but were very memorable. Like when she walked up, people paid attention. So she loved that. She loved the fact that she was talking about something that everybody needed. She loved that we could say the words Stonyfield and Applegate and everybody cared. Before we knew it, we're like, it's a lot of work, but this is not like super hard, right? Like so again, it was like the beginning of feeding off the energy, but like for 8 years, nearly 100% of our business development happened at that show, booth to
Wow.
booth. Like, I mean, just the quintessential grind. We went from 3 people to probably towards the peak, 8 or 9 that were splitting up the rows. And then we got clever. We learned you don't need to sell the value of a locator to a yogurt company. You just need to tell them these 8 yogurt companies already use it and they're on. And so then it was like, well, let's go get the pickle company. Let's go get the chocolate company. So long as we're in the category, we can sell more and faster through FOMO than through what the product does. And once that happened, we got into like supersonic mode. And that was, again, it was like another challenge. It was another like increase of velocity of working smarter. So there was like so much to be learned. But I think the like testament to my parents, my dad, was never feeling like making $3 million a year, having data, building an application where you felt super smart because somebody liked it and was willing to spend money on it, never made me above going booth to booth 500 times. That literally didn't feel weird to me. And I've found that the more people raise and dependent on other people's money, the more unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, they get put onto a pedestal. People are defined in what's beneath them. And those like roles become so limiting of one, what brings an organization together, what unlocks value, what allows you to pivot, what allows you to expand. And so just having that where my wife didn't feel it was beneath her, didn't resent me for it. I didn't feel it was beneath me. And then we like look back and we're like, our best moments were when we didn't know what was possible, but knew that it was the only thing worth doing. And we did it, with a smile on our face. So again, it reaffirmed that the next moment you find something that's humbling or appears beneath you is actually the beginning of something really exciting that you can't predict yet, and so I don't think everybody thinks like that, but I love interacting with people who think that way, and that's become a little bit of a way I define who's worth building the most kind of intimate relationships with at this stage in my life are people that embrace that rather than people that may reject that.
Well, yeah, what a great point. And you're totally right about we celebrate people who fundraise well at the expense of people who actually potentially build good businesses. And then, yeah, that also taints you as a person. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm a cool founder because I raised a little unicorn valuation and I'm pre-revenue. It's like,
I mean,
yeah,
it's a beautiful thing. I'm not taking any joy or accomplishment out of it. It is not easy to raise money. It is not easy to build a religion, especially if you're breaking new ground. But what I feel has been under-celebrated is running a business within its means, being around for many years, having sustained value, having high retention rates. Like there's this other thing that's been overshadowed by the size of the checks being written before the value has been demonstrated. And my last partner and I had this funny phrase every time we watched somebody in the industry maybe receive something that felt pre-value validation, that we said, may we always be the horses and not the unicorns. And that became our mantra. And we're like, it's not because it's easier, but man, if we pull this thing off, it will be more fulfilling to have been the horses along the way and not the unicorns. And we stood by that. And that became like a lifetime thing for me where, being a unicorn's great, but it's more fulfilling to know you did it during the traditional route where you never got ahead of your P&L. And it's,
I love that. I mean, you do get a lot more value out of horses than unicorns in the real world. I
especially
love it.
because you can touch them and ride them. Yeah.
Exactly. And at what point did you guys start partnering more closely with Tony and Spins? Like, did they make an investment in you guys? Like, how'd that shake out?
No, he, again, testament to him. He had an incredible eye for talent. He had I may have found Tony at this really unique intersection in the business where I think, had that entrepreneurial like insight where like he saw this like path of a decade ahead be connected. He was like, we've got enough leverage right now in the business and in the ecosystem that we can like snowball our value by using this leverage and frankly by innovating faster. So he kind of knew he wanted to innovate faster. He knew he had leverage and he was like ready to scale up. And again, serendipitously, our paths crossed. We had an incredible encounter at Panera Bread. And while he's hearing me pitch him super hard that I just want data at good terms, he's like, what are you doing in LA? And I was like, what do you mean? What am I doing? He's like, what are you doing? And I said, I want to, I'm going to build this thing. And then I've got to build this other thing. And I was like, I'm going to build an incubator. I'm going to build lots of these things. And he's like, why don't you build them here? And I was like, so not prepared. Like I wasn't prepared for that conversation. But man, I like respected how much he just took control of the wheel and just made my head spin because I'm like, I'm not here to be sold. I'm here to do the selling. And he flipped it on me. And at first I was like, is he unfocused? Like I'm talking about data terms and making money together. Like, why is he distracted? And then I like ended up walking away being like, oh, he might be this thing that's just been put in my path that was meant to tell me that there's this other road and I might actually be supposed to go on it, even though it wasn't on my map. I started to like look back at moments in my career, albeit were smaller and less significant, where the same kind of thing happened, and I was like, every time some unexpected thing happened, often a person at an unlikely time showed up and presented a path, I took it and it always worked. And it took me a minute to process it with him because now I'm talking about giving up the business but I kind of just doubled down. Thankfully, my girlfriend, who was soon to be my wife at that time, was like, she was rooting for me more than I was. She was like, you've proven everything you've needed to already running a service business. You've proven you could build an application. You've proven you could crack a nut on the first brands that cared. You've proven they could introduce you to more brands. She's like, stop being obsessed with seeing everything through. You're ready for this next challenge. She just put it out there. Do you think you could do more with his business than he could? And do you think it would be more fun to do that and might create more value for you than what you're doing? She's like, those are the only two questions that matter. And I was like, well, yes and yes. And she's like, let's move to Chicago. And I could have never said that. And so even she was put in my life for a reason to help me level up in a way I wouldn't predict. Our agreement was we were going to go for 6 months to get it off the ground. It ended up being 8.5 years. We're still working through that because she didn't want to be there for 8.5 years. But it was just this culmination of events where I started giving in. I started, if you're familiar with just like untethering, like I started just giving in. I started just embracing it and like making that part of my path and being less afraid of designing certainty and more embracing of unsolicited opportunity, which requires you to trust yourself in a very uncomfortable way. At least it was for me. It's like to go from something that you've designed, that you've mapped out, that you have a plan for, and that you've outwardly communicated to other humans, to something that is undefined, unplanned, that you haven't communicated to other humans, but you have an instinct is the right thing to do. That is a battlefield in your stomach. And not a lot of people I've seen navigate that super well, including myself. But man, when you do and you give in to the right thing for you in that moment, which might be different for different people, like, it's a way to experience life in like a spiritual way, and that's what happened in that moment. We packed our bags, we moved, and I said, you know, let's let's build. I'm here to build. And then that became, probably my most exciting chapter of my career so far. And we built a lot everywhere all the time until there was a formula, and until that formula was generating a lot of top line, a lot of bottom line, and until I had the absolute pressure to figure out how to hand the keys to a private equity company to then take this thing we did, this thing we've proven, this vision for the future we had, and got them willing to want to, you know, pay a decent amount of money to have ownership in that potential. Yeah. Thankfully it all started with the uncomfortable question at Panera Bread. That's how those moments happen.
Well, I think it's fascinating to hear that because it sounds like you built your business partly to not go through what your dad went through in 2008, and you wanted to control everything, and you wanted to hedge against all these uncertainties, and you wanted to have, yeah, ultimately all this control over your life. And then the moment that you let go of all that control, it sounds like you became happier and it was more freeing, but it was also, yeah, potentially even, oh, scary at the same time because your whole life you're like building up these walls to be like, okay, I'm not gonna fall into the same traps that my parents fell into, and it was the exact opposite that ended up being very liberating for you.
Yeah, I would say liberating now more than then. You do a good job compartmentalizing in the moment. Some fears were mine only for me to feel and deal with and not exposed. Sometimes you have really good people around you that are willing to, feel that you're human, not just a robot. Um, but I think if I look back, like there's this tension between having altitude and having humility. There's something really beautiful that's born out of the fear of not having certainty and having to reconcile that and live with that. And it makes you better at things. It makes you more thoughtful about things. It makes you more paranoid about things, makes you more obsessed with quality. But then altitude is what lets you sleep at night. Like, I have a little money in the bank. Like, it's not the end of the world if this quarter doesn't play out the way I projected. Right. And so I found that, over the last 20 years, what I didn't have 20 years ago was any altitude. I didn't have a buffer. I didn't have money in the bank. I didn't have a team that was going to have a year of salaries paid for. Everything was at risk all the time. And so I didn't have altitude. You just needed to suffer to survive and hope there was something left over to say it was worth it monetarily that year. As you get older, though, and you do have some moments of success and you create altitude, you're like, I can afford to fail at this entire business. I can afford to fail this year. I can afford to put more money in myself if I can't fundraise, right? But then I still wake up in the morning when I'm like in soldier mode to build something, to design something, or to sell something in a mindset where I have zero altitude. I have zero comforts when I'm selling. I have zero comforts when I'm designing, when I'm building. And it's like I walk into my office and I become the person I've been for 25 years. I leave my office and I see my wife and my daughter, and like the altitude, like the blood comes back into my veins to feel less afraid, less surviving. But it is a total, it's a trip to go between those two things in your own house within a 10 square foot difference every day. But I find that I've really compartmentalized comfort and I've really compartmentalized suffering, but I deeply live in both of them at different times, but they never cross. And I just found that like a really interesting thing I've learned about myself in the last few years. I think working from home accentuated that reality, because it's one thing to like go to an office and suffer. It's another thing to go to your extra room that is an office and suffer. You know what I mean? And so I'm curious if that's come up on your other podcast, but I find that that is a thing a lot of people I know that are in similar stages as me right now. They're 40, they've had some successes. They're all kind of like, I'm wearing two hats. My wife deeply hates one of them and hopes that only the other one shows up. I can't always take off one hat fast enough, and you're like, that multiple personality thing is not like joyful to have, but it's kind of necessary because you have a formula of what's made you successful. And you're like, at 40, I'm not trying to like create a new formula. If I'm committed to go do something, like I got to use the tricks that I know work. But now I have two people living in the same house, and it's kind of weird and uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, that is an interesting way to think about it, because obviously we all talk about the joys and the stress of building a company or running any business. I've never heard it described in that way, where you're putting them, it's like two separate people that are operating those two sides of it. And that is how you can compartmentalize it. I mean, the like one way to think about it is like you're living in the present, and whatever the situation happens to be in that moment, you just focus on that. But I do agree that it is different people, like the person that deals with, and I see myself too, especially if I haven't, if I'm hangry and that there's some shit going on at work, and you're like, God, I'm going to destroy this other company, and like they're ruining everything we're trying to do. And then you eat a little bit and you have another, like, everything's great and you're more creative and you're able to do this. And it's this, when you get into the certain zone, this like fight zone, like, shit, I got to figure this thing out. I'm going to try to like protect my people, my company, everything. But at the same time, yeah, it's hard to be in a creative state when you're operating like that, and being able to differentiate between the two is very important.
Yeah, I mean, on a very personal, vulnerable note, I felt that battle got to a place that was impacting me personally, mentally last year. And so I did a psychedelic journey that was guided. And that was kind of my intention, was to figure out how these two can live in peace, so I can live in peace, and how I can use the strength of the fear and I can use the comfort of the altitude. And I no longer wanted to be in constant conflict. And that was a first helpful step. And then for my 40th birthday, I've never been good at wanting birthday parties or celebrations or anything, but my wife forced me to do something. And so I ended up hosting for 9 of my closest friends, including my wife, a ayahuasca journey. And like, 4 of my friends were turning 40, all going through the same stuff. 2 of my business partners were there. Other people were turning 60, but I basically took like my favorite humans. We were in a room for 48 hours doing this thing in Ojai. And, it was like incredible to see people making peace with all their compartmentalized personalities. I mean, everybody had a different journey, but mine was pretty unique, to help me find a way to have these two live in some sort of harmony, where I don't have to not be an entrepreneur to be at peace. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want to have to choose, but I kept feeling like I was pressured to choose, but I didn't know how. Like all my intelligence and accomplishment like meant absolutely nothing at the moment, where you can't reconcile this emotional tension. And so it was like, I leveraged plant medicine, and I, went on this, and then it has continued to pay dividends. I'm obsessed with finding ways to get better, whether I can do it myself and do the work, whether I leverage something from the outside to do the work. Surround yourself with people that inspire you to think about things differently than you do. But I encourage people to just not sit in it. Like, there's no trophy for prolonged suffering. Nobody gives you a trophy for that. I've learned that already. Whatever you can do to be as restless about that as you are about declining revenue, embrace it and figure out how to deploy a strategy that might feel new or different or even unsubstantiated, and give yourself permission to find a way out or to better pastures. And so I gave myself permission to do that. And it has had huge impact on my ability to find more joy in the suffering and look at it more as this exciting chapter I'm proud to write, and less of this chapter that's taking away from my humanity. And I think that's going to give me several years of new energy, but I know not everybody's found that. And I didn't want to follow in that path. And I really know another way. So thankfully that helped open up some new neural pathways, as they say.
What was your journey like? What did you figure out? How did you start to make peace with some of this?
Lot of stuff. I'd say there were a few truths. The biggest truth was, from a very young age, I identified that I don't give myself capacity to feel like anything that doesn't feel good. And so I have a tendency to either insert humor, I have a tendency to insert productivity, or I have a tendency to like really rapidly execute on like a vision board. I'm always vision boarding, right? New house, remodel house, new thing, new travel, expose my daughter to I'm always figuring out how to make life more original for me, for my family, when possible, for my friends, my parents. So I've been really good at coming up with a lot of things to do that occupy capacity that don't require me to sit in ways to feel things. And I didn't know that my incredible amount of capacity I've been told I have was actually a tendency to mitigate living in the feelings. And it took me back to the moment that I think I started doing that, which was wild because I literally felt like this new machine get built that said, "Oh, I don't like the way this feels. I'm going to find a new way to not feel it." But you can't really do that. So all you can do is find a new way to be really distracted from it. What I was so shocked about from the journey is they tell you that we're basically just a bunch of young kids whose inner child stopped growing at some point. And we're in an operating system of an emotional operating system of an inner child, but in the body of like an adult that has responsibilities and stuff. But those moments that we feel deeply uncomfortable are because we've stopped growing that inner child kind of thing. So when you go back and you identify the moment that you stopped growing and you connect the dots of what happened there and what new operating system did I build, and wow, I have literally been operating on that operating system uninterrupted. And just because I found ways to make money, just because I was able to marry a beautiful woman, and just because she was able to have this incredible child with me, and we have some money and we live somewhere beautiful and my parents are healthy, my operating system must be perfect, right? Super notch, right? It finds a way of demonstrating bugs at the most unique times, and that's our system telling us. Reminder, you've got like some deferred maintenance, like you're operating off of a Windows 97 version of this thing. And, that whole journey gave you a chance to really know your operating system, literally see the version and date of it, and then really start to understand where that operating system is creating conflict for you. And so it's a combination of taking you back to moments. Like there were a lot of these montages. Like I'd have a thing and then it would show me all these montages of where I've used productivity to circumvent feeling, and where I've used humor to circumvent feeling, and where I've been really obsessive about things that were distracting from the things I was trying to not deal with. So you just get a really overwhelming high fidelity view, some of which you feel like you wake up and you're like super clear. Some of which you just like, I'll go on a run, I'll go on a walk, I'll be in a grocery store. And like, you just have this like major channel moment where something is just written for you as a new truth. And so it keeps coming to you. The more open-minded you are, the more you're willing to surrender, the more you can kind of receive. So it's kind of become this new part of life. But I'm an operating system that's receiving all these like agile releases, and it's great. And it's like, it just opens up a whole new world and a whole new me. And it gives me new things to interact with people around, and, more humility, frankly, about like how fragile we are and what happens when you're unintentional about certain parts of your life for a very long periods.
Wow. And I'm curious how, so you mentioned you're using your productivity as some kind of defense against feeling things. And going back to the beginning of our conversation, you talked about how your dad, it sounds like, was an even more intense version of you in that regard, where he was constantly being productive. But you seem like someone who's very reflective. You're trying to understand and figure out why and how you're doing this. I'm an immigrant. I'm the son of immigrants, or understand that mentality. I would imagine your dad is not willing to do an ayahuasca journey and try to figure out some of the stuff about himself, although maybe he might benefit from something like it. I'm curious how you view your relationship with your dad and like your understanding of what he might be going through that he might not have the vocabulary to even express because he has not done this. And it is work, right? It takes a lot and courage and all these things to actually try to do it. And I imagine that he probably does not do that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of my desire for truth and understanding, like, I don't think you can be a great entrepreneur without having some lens and commitment to self improvement. It's natural. Like running a business, growing a business, pivoting a business, weathering storms requires humility, self reflection, change. So, like, it's kind of innately built in. I will say my dad from a young age was very insightful about himself, about his role, about his abilities, about his contribution. And There were times where I felt like he was pretty closed. I'd say in his later years, like, my dad's now officially crossed into his 70s. He's actually done a lot of work. He's done a lot of therapy. He's tried to, take some garbage bags off his shoulders, so to speak. He was in a war. He, didn't have his parents full time when he was younger. Family was broken apart for many reasons, lost his best friend in the army. Like, he had a lot, who I was named after. Like, he had a lot of things. I am a reminder of loss to him while I am a celebration as well, So I've lived with that my whole life. He's reminded me of that my whole life. My dad has been on a journey. He has not had the benefit of some of these tools and society's desensitization that psychedelics now is not as looked upon as bad as it was 10 years ago. But he's been fairly committed to the work. I'd say he's gotten through 50-ish% of a lot of the stuff that might distract him on a day-to-day basis or hold him back. And he's pretty committed to live life. He wants to try new things. He wants to eliminate the weird neuroses of why he doesn't. He's trying to figure out how to say more yes than pause. He's trying to be more impulsive. And if you want to do that, you got to unpack why those are not your natural tendencies. And if you're committed enough, you're going to work through the stuff and you're going to start to shed, right? It's like one of the words, like shed, surrender, give in, etc. There's definitely a chunk, and it's the chunk that I think he and I hopefully is the next 5 years, which goes a lot deeper. Truths that are so hard written into his world for self-preservation. We all have them. Truths that would be so scary that would unwind 70 years of truth, 70 years of comfort, 70 years of love or adoration for a parent. Like, there's things that he has not wanted to even consider askable questions. And I think we all have those. So I'd say he's done a really good job. He's actually not completely opposed to some of the things I've done. I wouldn't say he was going to have his 40th birthday do it, but he's open and he's seen the huge change it's had on me and my wife. All my parents have, actually. So thankfully, I wasn't like insecure about doing it. I wasn't insecure about sharing it. They always ask me about it and check in with me on it. And so I actually think I'm doing a service to them in a way to remind them that even at their age, caring, suffering, and a way of doing things that don't serve you at the most to make use of this third chapter of yours is not the best. And I think I've subtly inspired them to, maybe more quietly on their own than with me out loud, start chipping away at that. And it's unlocked new parts of our relationship. And I think it will continue to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's great that they're willing to try this, and that you guys are working on this together. I think it's also really, again, interesting how these conversations go from business to the personal side, and the personal side has such a big impact, to your point about whether it's like the multiple personalities where you're trying to put things in different boxes, but they still end up impacting each other and bleeding into your life. And to be successful in business and in life requires a lot of work. And someone looking at it from the outside, just so the things you can easily measure, like exits and revenues and all this, it's tells only one part of the story, and the other part is different. But then it also goes back to, like, how the two parts influence each other, and how sometimes, like, you end up achieving more success because of all this, like, all this craziness that you're dealing with, and you're using that as an outlet to achieve it. But that doesn't necessarily equate to happiness, and to try to figure it all out is, yeah, that's where the real hard work is.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like the cliche of like, are you working to live or are you living to work? And I feel like there's this middle ground, which is like I love working, like nobody talks about that. It's like they either demonize that you're a workaholic or you're lazy or retired or you've given up or you've, hung it up on the shelf or whatever. And I'm like, there's this like lane I've lived in. It's the one my dad lived in. It's the one all my best friend entrepreneurs live in, or my partners. Like, we just love to work. Like, we're here to do something that's memorable. We're here to create more financial security. Maybe that turns into more trips. Maybe that turns into supporting our parents a little bit more as a way to say thank you for all their sacrifice, like whatever it might be. But like, why can't you just love being productive? And if you're in that lane and you're not doing it just because you're obsessed with suffering or working or trying to spend time away from your family or whatever, or that you're too tired, giving up, or too afraid to go at it again, like, you kind of need to find a way to create chemistry that works between the side of you that doesn't need to and the side of you that loves to. And that's kind of what I felt. I was not done after we sold our last business. I had a little bit of anger. I had a little bit of questioning, could I do it myself, or did it only happen because I had these other partners that had already done things for a decade before I got there? Like, you just have all these like things you got to deal with. But I'm like, no, I actually think I just like love building things. I love designing things. I love inventing things, and I love bringing something to the market that they've never seen before and they choose to adopt as a new standard. That's my happy place. And there's a lot of suffering that goes into that. There's a lot of money that goes into that. There's a lot of sadness or even depression that goes into that. I needed a way to do that that felt okay, right? Like, because it takes years. This is not like a 6 month sprint. It's like it takes years. It's a lifestyle. And so what I needed, and what I think a lot of people that live in that lane that's not talked about a lot, is you got to find a way to tie your humanity to your ambition. And God bless you if you figured out a way to reconcile your emotions and your guilt of not taking your child to school because you have a call. And like, how do you do all of that? Are you a bad dad because you have the money and aren't spending every moment with your child? Or are you a good dad because you're a role model, that you're pursuing things you love, and despite missing a couple things of your child, you're giving them the gift of loving how you spend your time? Like, which one is more important? There is no right answer, right? So you got to find a way to create chemistry or rewire your chemistry to find the beauty in, the polarity of the two. And I think that's when I hit 40 or was coming to 40, I'm like, the biggest problem I need to solve is not a personal one and it's not a business one. It's this thing. And I need to find a way where I can feel empowered by my altitude and my love for my family and my ambition and my loving to win and my wanting to continue to accumulate financial security, and just say these are all gifts. They're not taking away from each other. They're empowering my ability to live a big, beautiful, challenging, ambitious life. But that is not the way I looked at it. So I'm like, my gift for 40 is I want to surround myself with people that all kind of have similar demons and are all willing to embrace something from the outside that's going to challenge their norms and surrender to hopefully answers of how this chemistry can make this a more beautiful journey, rather than one that is either really good or really bad at any moment in time, and hopefully it's the beginning of a new era. But I'm excited about the prospect that it's going to give me more opportunities than the prior operating system did.
Well, David, I think this is a perfect place to end things. This was an amazing conversation, and yeah, it's really great to have heard your story from your beginnings all the way to the self-actualization and Maslow's pyramid. Getting to a point where you can be happy and you can get all the joy from these different parts of your life without necessarily sacrificing one at the expense of the other. And it's something that I'm sure a lot of us would love to get to at some point.
Well, Matei, I really appreciate the opportunity. I haven't had a chance to meet you before, so anybody watching this knows that this was our first encounter. But it's been fun. Also, having no idea where we were going to go with this, but thanks for going on the journey, and I really appreciate it. It was great questions, great discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. Likewise, this was a pleasure.